It's another month. Let's look at all the films and TV shows I watched in the month of August. So the first thing I watched this month was Scream 4. This was a rewatch. If you watched last month's video, then you know that I'm rewatching the Scream films for Scream 6. And this is probably my favourite since the first. The script is just great in this film, and the twists and turns the story takes always keeps me on the edge of my seat, in suspense. Obviously it's great seeing the original trio return again, but I like how they give the center stage to a bunch of new characters that are not really that likeable, but I think that's kind of the point. The final act is just one of the best in the franchise in my opinion, and it's just one of the most satisfying endings to a horror film that I've seen. I give it an 8.5. And then I watched Scream 2022, Scream 5 or whatever. There's another really great sequel that treats the original trio as legacy characters and gives yet another group of teenagers the spotlight. And these teens are much more likeable, and I do really feel awful when one of them is killed off. Well, apart from the Ghostface killers, but also I like their relations to other characters in the franchise and how that all connects in the final act, along with a bunch of risks this film took that really paid off in my opinion. The final act is kind of a rehash of the first, but that's really what it's trying to go for, I think. And it's just not as fun as 4, with how predictable it can be, especially on rewatch. But I still find it to be really solid. I give it an 8. And then I watched Scream 6. This was the second Scream film that I hadn't watched along with Scream 3, and I was really excited to check this one out. First of all, the opening is probably top 3 of the franchise in my opinion, along with 2 and 1. Again, it just diverts expectations, which the Scream franchise is really good at doing. This is probably the most gory out of the Scream films as well, with a bunch of like really gnarly kills. That kind of makes the audience realise that this isn't any old Ghostface. I like Kirby returning from 4. She was definitely the most likeable in the friend group in that film. I do think that the focus is brought off Ghostface for the first half of the film, and more on the survivors from the last film and how they are coping with everything, which is really great to see. Usually we just move on in a lot of the films in the franchise, but you really feel the impact of the last film and how it impacts this film. This installment had just a bunch of really tense chase scenes that rivaled earlier films in terms of stakes, and it just had me on the edge of my seat again. I do think the ending was a little bit anticlimactic, reminded me a bit of 2 and 3, and a lot of people survived this film who I thought were 100% dead and got stabbed like 20 times, but I can suspend my disbelief for something like a Scream film. I give it an 8. And then I watched Operation Fortune Rooster Grass. This is a Ritchie film that I liked way more than I was expecting to. I just had a really fun time with it. It has a bit of like a gadget side to it that reminded me of Mission Impossible, and had another really great Hugh Grant performance. The story itself feels like something that should be pretty simple and easy to follow, but there's a lot of twists and turns that make this story way more convoluted come the final act. I was just confused about which side everyone was on at the end, but I was still moderately interested in the film. You've got Ritchie regulars back like Jason Statham, but you've also got new faces like Aubrey Plaza, who I thought did a really fun performance in this film. It also has enough Ritchie-isms to where I could recognise it as a Ritchie film if I didn't know the director, which I think is a good thing. I give it a 7. And then I watched They Clone Tyrone. I heard really good things about this film, and it was on Netflix, so I gave it a watch, and I just absolutely love this film. This reminded me of something like My Name is Dolomite, which is one of my favourite blaxploitation films, with the style and dialogue. I really like this film even before it had the supernatural twist to it. I like how it's filmed on like old cameras, and how it creates this grainy effect. It actually feels like this town is stuck in the 70s. The cinematography is great and conveys characters' emotions really well. The concept itself is just really fun, with some really amazing acting from people like Jamie Foxx, and especially John Boyega, who I recognise from the Star Wars films, and plays just a completely different character here. It does get a bit confusing at the end, with working out which clone is which, but the twists and turns this film takes leads to a really engaging story, and just one of the most unique films of the year for me. I'd give it a 9. And then I watched The Covenant. This is another Ritchie film that surprised me with how much I really liked it. Judging by the cover, I expected it to be like another boring slog like Wrath of Man, but I was really invested for most of this. This is also based on a true story, which I didn't actually realise till the end. This film doesn't have many Ritchie-isms like Wrath of Man, but it really makes up for it in terms of the story and the acting. Jake Gyllenhaal does a really great job in this film, and where his character goes in this film is just really intriguing. There's some great tension built up as well with the Taliban pursuing these people as well. When a fight breaks Lights Out, again, it's not much of a visual treat. It's just pretty generic action, but I just found the story to be great. And also a film of two halves, which was interesting. I give it a 7.5. And then I watched Rushmore. I wanted to watch all of Wes Anderson's filmography that's available on Disney Plus for the time being to prepare for Asteroid City. The only film I actually watched of his is Fantastic Mr. Fox, which is just one of my favourite films of all time. I actually dressed up as Fantastic Mr. Fox for World Book Day in like primary school, and everyone bullied me and called me a furry. So anyway, this is a great film from Anderson and sees him beginning to establish his unique style of filmmaking. This film I feel is great because it doesn't really make you root for one character in this film. They all really have their flaws, especially Jason Schwartzman and Bill Murray's characters, who have a great back and forth throughout this film. It's just an extremely charming and fun watch throughout and comes to a very satisfying conclusion. I give it a 9. Then I watched The Royal Tenenbaums. Is that how you say it? Tenenbaums. This really feels like the birth of the Anderson style. You got the signature like head-on style of cinematography, and each character is just written in such a great and engaging way, which makes a lot of moments feel so much more heartwarming or heartbreaking as the film progresses. Like Rushmore, everyone in this family has their problems and bad character traits they learn to overcome by the end. And somehow Anderson manages to make them all likeable and then just balanced out really well throughout the film. The acting is great, and I love seeing one of my favourite comedy directors, Ben Stiller, show up in this film as well. It's just an almost perfect film. I give it a 9.5. And then watch The Life Aquatic. I didn't like this film as much as the last two Anderson films, but it is still really great. Again, his signature style is pushed even further with this film, with stop motion being incorporated when showing the sea creatures, which really conveys the wondrous nature of the sea and how Steve in this film really views the sea. I think a big problem that I had with this film is that Steve is not really a character to root for. At the start, he seems to view everything through his own film that he's making and really disregards his possible son, which makes Owen Wilson's character more likeable. This film is just so unpredictable though, with out of nowhere twists and turns. And again, Anderson really knows how to end a film. I do think the pacing was a bit off for a good chunk of this film compared to his last two, but it really picked up in the second half with a great story and engaging and well written characters. I'd give it an 8.5. And then watch The Darjeeling Limited. I think this is the weakest Anderson film I'd watch up to this point, but it's still a very well made and enjoyable film. I really like these three brothers dynamic and how one thing leads to another. I've noticed that many Anderson films have these characters who are very flawed by the start, but they learn to grow as a person over the course of the film, which is what these three brothers do with learning to love each other. It's also really great seeing how a country like India operates, and all the sites and locations are shot brilliantly. I do think once they get kicked off the train, things do get a bit off the rails, and I just feel like the final act was a bit underwhelming. The acting from Jason Schwartzman, Owen Wilson and Adrian Brody is great, and I really do think they have good chemistry in this film, but everything just going around these characters is a little bit uneventful for an Anderson film. I'd give it an 8. And then I watched Shin Kamen Rider, or as it's called in the UK, Shin Masked Rider. I wanted to watch this because it was on Prime and people were saying pretty good things about it, so I gave it a watch. And it was very crazy, but a good kind of crazy. I know this was based on a TV show, I think, which I haven't watched, but it looks like this film did that justice. I think the concept is great, and I really like these main two characters tracking down and killing all these different animal hybrids, which are really creatively designed. Some of the hybrids, especially the Batman, look absolutely hideous, and the cinematography really enhances that with really close up and wide angle shots that I don't know how to feel about. This film is just so inconsistent with its CGI as well. Some CGI shots look absolutely beautiful or cool based on the scene, but some other action sequences remind me of the final fight from Black Panther, but in daylight. It's definitely an unforgettable film though, that generally has some great cinematography, acting and story, and I wasn't expecting that ending, which was again very weird.
I give it an 8.
And then I rewatched Fantastic Mr. Fox. I was really excited to revisit this film again, because like I said, it's one of my favourite films of all time, and with the added knowledge of Anderson's previous films, it made this film surprisingly even more enjoyable. I rewatched this previously in 2021, and I do have a lot of nostalgia for it, as I used to play it on DVD a lot back in the day. The animation, first of all, is phenomenal. Some of the best stop motion I've probably ever seen. The story itself is great, obviously being based off a Roald Dahl story, which I learned on IMDb was Anderson's first book he ever read, and it really shows, like the passion really shows in this film. The voice acting is great, and it obviously features a lot of Wes Anderson regulars. You got Bill Murray and Owen Wilson, but you got newcomers like George Clooney and Meryl Streep really shining as main characters. I just find it to be so quotable. The score and soundtrack is just so memorable, and there's just so much great humour injected into this film that just makes for such an enjoyable watch. I just can't stop raving about this film. It's a 10 out of 10. And then I watched The Grand Budapest Hotel. I did want to watch Moonrise Kingdom, but it wasn't on Disney Plus. I also want to watch Bottle Rocket. I'll get to those at the end of the year, I think, because I do really want to watch them. I heard this is Anderson's best film, and after watching it, I still like Fantastic Mr. Fox better. It's just not as fun or straightforward as Fantastic Mr. Fox, but it's still a top 3 Anderson film for me. First of all, I really like the changing aspect ratio to convey the different periods of time, and the cinematography again is just phenomenal. Probably the best use of cinematography in Anderson's whole filmography. The story is just constantly moving, and there's a lot of tension built, especially with Willem Dafoe's character. Again, you've got a lot of Anderson regulars, but I really love Ralph Fiennes as the owner of the hotel, and all the problems he gets into. Tony Revolori is great as the lobby boy as well. I like how quiet he is throughout the film, giving the spotlight to the older version of himself, who narrates the story within a story within a story. It's just beautiful to look at, and it has all the Anderson charm an Anderson film could have. I give it a 9.5. And then I watched Isle of Dogs. I'm pretty sure I watched this around when it came out. I don't remember anything from it, so I'm going to count it as a first time watch. I think this is an Anderson film that has more style over substance. Every shot in the film is just beautifully created, but the story is just not as interesting as other Anderson films. It's basically a film about government corruption, which I feel he could do a lot with, but the story is just very straightforward, and everything just gets resolved by the end. It's just not as enjoyable as other Anderson films. Even though you have some great voice acting from people like Walter White Dog, it is very charming and cute at points, with the child interacting with the dogs, but it just doesn't come together as well as I would have liked it to. It's probably tied with Darjeeling Limited as not the best Anderson film. I give it an 8. And then I watched The French Dispatch. This is probably Wes Anderson's most Wes Anderson film. This is the most Wes Anderson-y a Wes Anderson film can get. Every shot in this film is signaturely Wes Anderson-y. I didn't really mind the anthology aspect of this film. I know everything connected at the end was pretty well done, but I just didn't connect with a lot of the characters, and I found the majority of the stories being told to just be a bit uninteresting. I'll probably rank the stories from worst to best 2, 3, 1, and there are a lot of great aspects, especially the 2D aspects of this film, but I just think it's an Anderson film that focuses a bit too much on style over an engaging substance. I give it an 8. And then I watched No Hard Feelings. This is another 2023 film that I was really interested in watching, and I had a really great time with this. It's just a comedy that has a great concept and just rides with it. A lot of people also said it reminds them of mid-2000s comedy films like Judd Apatow movies, which I really get. It really does feel like a Judd Apatow film. It really has a raunchiness and edginess to it, whilst also having some heartwarming and serious moments that I think are pretty well done. I didn't really have any problems with the pacing, and the chemistry between all of these actors is just great. Maybe some jokes didn't land as well as others, and I think the script gets a bit messy near the end. Maybe the writers struggled a bit on how to end the film as well, but it's just a really fun time overall. I give it a 7.5. And then I watched Asteroid City. This is a Wes Anderson film that I was really interested to watch because I knew it involved aliens, which seemed like a fun concept for a Wes Anderson film, but I do feel like this film took a while to click with me and just really understand what's going on. I was a little bit confused with the black and white scenes until I realised it was focusing on the creator of the play and the actors behind the play, which is a bit like a story within a story, which Anderson likes to do now and again. I did find it to be a little bit boring though, until the arrival of the aliens. After that, it was interesting to see how the people were affected by the aliens and what the government tries to do to keep it from the public. I found that all really interesting and fun. It just can get a bit too artsy and abstract, especially during that last black and white scene of the film, which is just a bit weird. It's still another really solid Anderson film though. I give it an 8. And then I watched Memento. I wanted to get into Christopher Nolan's filmography now, because obviously Oppenheimer, I still haven't watched it. I'm going to wait till it comes out on digital. The only Nolan films I'm really familiar with are the Dark Knight trilogy. Those are the only Christopher Nolan films that I've watched, but this one was on Netflix, so I gave it a watch. And it hurt my brain a lot, but it was amazing. It's actually kind of similar to Asteroid City, where it has black and white scenes and colour scenes. In this film though, it really gets creative with those scenes, with the colour scenes constantly going backwards from scene to scene, and then the black and white scenes going forwards, culminating in like an extremely well written conclusion, which I really loved. I really like how I questioned everyone in this film, and how you put more pieces of this puzzle together with the main character. I don't think it's perfect, because it is extremely challenging and not really enjoyable to watch. It hurt my brain, but it's so well written, so well shot, so well acted. I give it a 9.5. And then I watched Boston Strangler. I heard decent things about this film. It was on Disney Plus, so I gave it a watch, and it's one of my least favourite films of the year. I think Keira Knightley did a good job, and it was weird hearing her with an American accent. I also thought the first 20 minutes or so were pretty intriguing. It reminded me a little bit of The Dharma Show, with how the murders were presented, but as the film went on, it just became progressively less and less interesting, to where I was just waiting for the film to end. The writing was just so generic and by the books, and there was just no other character than Keira Knightley who I found interesting or likeable. The cinematography is not half bad, and I do like a good period setting, but this was just not it. I give it a 6. Speaking of period settings, the next film I watched was The Prestige, which was another Nolan film. It was on Amazon Prime, so I gave it a watch, and I absolutely loved this one. I think it's just flawless. Christian Bale and Hugh Jackman do phenomenal performances as these two magicians, and it's great seeing the back and forth between them in this film. I used to be obsessed with magic 6 or 7 years ago. I used to watch Penn and Teller. I used to have all the magic sets. I used to pick up every magic set that was possibly available at Toys R Us. So this is really my type of film. I found David Bowie in this film to be a surprise, and how his character's creation is so significant to the plot. This film is just so encapsulating. The twists and rug pulls this film has constantly keeps me on my toes, and I was not expecting that ending, which I really wanted from a film like this. It wasn't predictable at all, and I found it to be extremely rewatchable as well. I'd give it a 10. And then I skipped a few Nolan films and went on to Dunkirk, which was also on Amazon Prime. Like I said with Anderson, I do want to watch the rest of Nolan's films later on in the year, but I'm just sticking to the ones that are on streaming platforms for now. I really want to like this film more than I did, but I just don't find it to be as enjoyable of a watch than a Nolan film like The Prestige, or as engaging or encapsulating as Memento. I appreciate how he tried to like tackle all the events of the Dunkirk events, from the airplanes to the boats to the soldiers on the shores, and there's a lot of tension built during these stories, but the problem was I was interested in some stories over others, and it would cut back and forth between something tense happening on the boat and then something tense happening with Tom Hardy's character in the air, and I only really cared about the characters on the boats, as I feel like those characters were more fleshed out. I just think it was a bit uneven because of that. I think the score was great, acting was great, and the cinematography is some of the best I've seen from Nolan probably, but it just isn't the best I've seen from him in my opinion. I give it a 7.5. And then I watched Reality. This is another 2023 film that I heard good things about again, so I thought I'd give it a watch. It was only an hour and 20 minutes as well, so I knew nothing about US politics going into this film. Coming out of the film, I knew a little bit more about US politics. Is that a good thing? Is that a bad thing? I don't know. This does feel a lot like an Oscar bait movie, from the way it's shot to the performances from the actors. There's just some shots in this film where I can imagine the banner at the bottom of the screen with the actor's name at the bottom. I do think that Sydney Sweeney did a really great performance in this film that can be very subtle at points, but there's moments where reality really comes out of a shell, which is symbolised very fittingly by a snail, I guess, which is a bit too on the nose in my opinion, but I think a good amount of the script, and down to the pronunciation of the actors, I think is almost a copy of the transcript from the FBI, which really shows and makes for a more believable performance with people talking over each other in that. I like the slow burn nature of this film and how 90% of this film is set in a house, and I found it interesting for the most part. It taught me about American history. I give it an 8. So that is all the films and films. I only watched films this month that I watched in the month of August. I'm currently still watching My Adventures with Superman. I've only got one episode left by the time of recording. I still find it to be very charming and fun. I'm warming up more to Jack Quaid's Superman, as well as I didn't really find him that likeable at the start. The animation's still great, the voice acting's still great, and there's just some really fun stories from episode to episode. I'm also watching Demon Slayer. I wanted to watch this because people say it's one of the best animes of all time, and it was on Netflix, so I thought I'd give it a watch. And overall, it's really solid, and I really like the lore building, but the storylines are dragged out a bit, especially for a first season, because the other anime that I've watched, My Hero Academia, has like a 15 episode first season, which I'd say is a pretty good way to ease me into the show, whereas this season has 25 episodes, 24 episodes, which is a bit much, but it's still really well animated, with some great and creative action, and I'm in the latter half of the first season now. I'm also watching Ahsoka, which I'm not enjoying that much. I'm actually debating on whether I should just leave the show, because a lot of people are saying that you have to watch Rebels to understand this show, and I just can't be asked to watch Rebels, I'm sorry. It's just 4 seasons, and they're saying you have to watch bits of Clone Wars to understand it as well. I ain't watching all that. I think this is how non-MCU fans must feel when they have to watch something like WandaVision before Doctor Strange 2. I just can't be asked. I'm not that interested in the Star Wars world to watch a 4 season show. I've watched the first 3 episodes so far, and I've just zoned out during every single one. I'm sorry. I just don't think it's a show for me. And then I'm also watching the live action One Piece. This is a show I was really interested about after seeing the first trailer, because I'm not watching 1,000 episodes of a TV show, of an anime, okay? I refuse. So I thought this might be a good substitute, and I'm on the 3rd episode, and I'm enjoying it. It's just a really fun time. There are some weird editing moments and weird shots of actors, but I think it's trying to pay homage to the anime, which I can appreciate, and it's done pretty well from what I've seen. So yeah, if you enjoyed the video, please like it.